Speaking of meeting God, did Boeing kill a guy? I'm framing that as a question so that Boeing doesn't feel the need to come after you, boy, because they got shooters, bro. Allegedly, Boeing has been the center of a lot of conversations about, like, man, I can't get these. I kind of want to get this middle ground where the ads aren't pushing in on us at all sides, but it is what it is on articles. Boeing has been putting out trash airplanes recently, and people have been dying. Literally, there's been planes that have like faulty walls and wings and engines and navigation systems that have killed like 400 plus people or something total. It's actually nuts. But recently they had a whistleblower, John Barnett, I think is the name, and was one of the only people at Boeing willing to say, hey, look, these are bad business practices. I wouldn't fly in one of these planes. The engineering is faulty. And then he said, well, we'll talk about it, but if you haven't seen this article, he is dead now with what they are saying is a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the right temple, which is incredibly convenient for Boeing. So, yeah, we'll see. Man, Congress, maybe you should do something about this. Maybe. All right, let's read the article. John Barnett had one of those bosses who seemed to spend most of his waking hours scheming to inflict humiliation upon him. He mocked him in weekly meetings whenever he dared contribute a thought, assigned a fellow manager to spy on him and spread rumors that he did not play nicely with others, and disciplined him for things like using email to communicate and pushing for flaws he found on planes to be fixed. John is very knowledgeable, almost to a fault, as it gets in the way at times when issues arise. The boss wrote in one of his withering performance reviews, downgrading Barnett's rating from a 40 all the way to a 15 in an assessment that cast the 26-year-old quality manager, who was known as Swampy for his easy Louisiana drawl, as an anal retentive prick whose pedantry was antagonizing his colleagues. The truth, by contrast, was self-evident to anyone who spent 5 minutes in his presence. John Barnett, who raced cars in his spare time and seemed high on life, according to one former colleague, was a great fun boss that loved Boeing and was willing to share his knowledge with everyone, as one of his former quality technicians would later recall. But Swampy was mired in an institution that was in perpetual state of unlearning all the lessons it had absorbed over a 90-year ascent to the pinnacle of global manufacturing. Like most neoliberal institutions, Boeing had come under the spell of seductive new theory of knowledge that essentially reduced the whole concept to a combination of intellectual property, trade secrets, and data, discarding thought and understanding and complex reasoning possessed by a skilled and experienced workforce as essentially not worth the increased healthcare costs. Oh, man. Capitalism, baby. We love that. The turnover in these places so they don't have to continue to pay someone higher and higher salaries. CEO Jim McNerney, which, by the way, is an insidious business practice, literally firing people so they can't continue to accrue wealth in the same spot unless they're hyper profitable. CEO Jim McNerney, who joined Boeing in 2005, had last helmed 3M, where management, as he saw it, had overhauled experience and undervalued leadership before he purged the veterans into early retirement. So Jim McNerney is someone that should consider reading about the French Revolution as a cautionary tale. Prince Jim, as some long-timers used to call him, repeatedly invoked a slur for longtime engineers and skilled machinists in the obligatory vanity Leadership book he co-wrote. Those who cared too much about the integrity of the planes and not enough about the stock price were phenomenally talented assholes. Wow. And he encouraged his deputies to ostracize them into leaving the company. He initially refused to let nearly any of these talented assholes work on the 787 Dreamliner, instead of outsourcing the vast majority of the development and engineering and design of the brand new revolutionary wide-body jet to suppliers, many of which lacked engineering departments. Oh my God. So obviously, I think it goes without saying, most people don't want to even fly on Boeing anymore, or really for that matter on any planes, because this is happening. It hasn't. I don't know if it stopped at 100%, but I guarantee people are not buying plane tickets at as high a clip because of this. The plan would save money while busting unions. A win-win, he promised investors. While busting unions. Ugh. Instead, McNerney's plan burned some $50 billion in excess of its budget and went 3.5 years behind schedule. Good. Fuck this guy. Swampy belonged to one of the cleanup crews that Boeing detailed to McNerney's disaster area. The supplier to which Boeing had outsourced part of the 787 fuselage had in turn outsourced the design to an Israeli firm that had botched the job, an Israeli firm that botched the job, leaving the supplier strapped for cash in the midst of a global credit crunch. Boeing would have to bail out and buy out the private equity firm that controlled the supplier. In 2009, Boeing began recruiting managers from Washington State to move east to the supplier's non-union plant in Charleston, South Carolina, to train the workforce to properly put together a plane. Non-union plant, of course. But after the FAA cleared Boeing to deliver its first 787s to customers around the end of 2011, one of Swampy's coworkers said that McNerney's henchmen began targeting anyone with experience and knowledge for torment and termination. One of Swampy's closest colleagues, Bill Seitz, took a demotion to go back west. A quality control engineer named John Woods was terminated for insisting inspectors thoroughly document damage and performed on composite materials, which was far less resilient than steel. He was terminated for insisting inspectors document damage and repair? How can you be fucking fired for that? His literal job is quality control. Did you sue John Woods? Did you sue? In 2014? Good machinists and inspectors who wore wristbands in support of a union drive were framed with dubious infractions. Everyone from Everett started dropping like flies, remembers a former manager at the plant. They kept leaving. There's a form we all had to sign that says you take responsibility for anything that goes wrong, and it states pretty clearly that if something happens to a plane because of something you did wrong, you can face a major fine or jail time for that, the manager recalled. The Everett managers took that seriously. Charleston leadership did not. The bosses hit Swampy with a new initiative called Multifunction Process Performer, through which quality inspectors were directed to outsource 90% of their duties to the mechanics they were supposed to be supervising. How do you delegate to your inferiors your job that is their oversight? You can't delegate oversight to the people you're doing the oversight on. This is so stupid. Put me in charge of Boeing. Give me $1 billion to run Boeing. This was supposed to speed up production and save Boeing millions once it successfully shed the thousands of inspectors it intended to axe. Swampy believed relying on mechanics to self-inspect their work was not only insane, but illegal under the Federal Aviation Administration Charter, which explicitly required quality inspectors to document all defects detected, works performed, and parts installed on a commercial airplane in one centralized database. Swampy knew he was caught in a prisoner's dilemma. If he went along, he was breaking the law. If he didn't, whistleblowers who complained about unsafe practices were routinely terminated on the grounds of violating the same safety protocols that they had opposed violating. What the fuck? It's been happening for years. Fuck Boeing, dude. Swampy, their name is dragged through the fucking mud now. And for good reason. They're just vultures, dude. Swampy calculated it would be a bigger pain for Boeing to fire him for doing the right thing than following orders, so he kept his head down and continued managing his inspectors as though he were back in Everett, taking special care to meticulously record every episode of noncompliance and nonconformance, which is similar but not identical, he encountered. He documented his discovery that machinists installing floor panels had been littering long titanium slivers into wire bundles and electrical boxes between the floorboards and the cargo compartment ceiling panels, where they risked causing an electrical short. This is so dangerous. A series of mysterious battery fires had already caused the FAA to ground the 787 for a few months, just over a year after the first plane had been delivered. Is it mysterious? He wrote that 75 out of a package of 300 oxygen masks slated for installation on a plane did not actually pump oxygen. His team compiled a list of 300 defects on a fuselage scheduled for delivery, and 300 different defects on one fuselage? All rivets or something? And he discovered that more than 400 non-conforming aircraft parts had gone missing from the defective parts cage and likely been installed on planes illegally and without documentation by managers and mechanics desperate to get them out the door. So this is the line where they say that Boeing was making planes out of literal trash. They're trash planes, bro. They're jalopies. They deaf off this man, right? Flying around in a literal fucking jalopy. LSU Tigers fan. 30 years he worked at this place, doing his best. Literally just doing his best, man. Ugh. Your boyfriend worked at a fire suppression and lighting systems on Boeing 747s? The guy who had the position before him died and no one knew how to do his job, so my boyfriend just figured out, what the fuck? When is the government going to step in and do their fucking jobs? Big-ass investigation going on now, I'm sure. Few quality managers were as stubborn as Swampy. This just brings to mind the bash program and don't look up. We are so fucked as a species. Wow. Messy. I work in construction at a major American car plant. These practices would not fly there. I can't imagine how they're doing this in an airplane manufacturer. I know, right? And like, you know, planes, you can get into a car crash and survive. Plane crash survival rates, not great. Not ideal. Certainly not when the fucking navigation system puts you into a nosedive and the controls don't let you do anything else, because that's what happened on 2 planes. A Seattle Times story detailed an internal Boeing document boasting that the incidence of manufacturing defects on the 787 had plunged 20% in a single year. Wow. Which inspectors anonymously attributed to the bullying environment in which defects had systemically stopped being documented by inspectors. They weren't fooling customers. Qatar Airways had become so disgusted with the state of the planes it received from Charleston that it refused to accept them, and even inspired the Qatar-owned Al Jazeera to produce a withering documentary called Broken Dreams, in which an employee outfitted with a hidden camera chit-chatted with mechanics and inspectors about the planes they were producing. Quote, they hire these people off the street, dude, fucking flipping burgers for a living, making sandwiches at Subway. One mechanic marveled of his colleagues. Another regaled the narrator with tales of coworkers who came to work high on coke and painkillers and weed because no one had ever had a urine test. Asked if they would fly the 787 Dreamliner, just 5 of 15 answered yes, and even the positive responses did Boeing no favors. I probably would, but I have kind of a death wish too. Yeah, I'd fly a 787, but I'm pretty depressed, man. I just kind of want to die. The day after Broken Dreams premiered, Swampy got an email informing him that he'd been put on a 60-day corrective action plan for 4 weeks earlier. His alleged offense constituted using email to communicate about process violations. The HR file noted fictitiously that his boss had discussed his infraction with him earlier. Swampy was no fool. Leadership wants nothing in email, so they maintain plausible deniability, he wrote in the comment space on his corrective action plan paperwork. It is obvious leadership is just looking for items to criticize me on, so I stop identifying issues. I will conform. He immediately applied for a job on the graveyard shift, whose supervisor promised the gig would go to the manager with the most seniority on the final assembly team. But the job went to a manager who had transferred to final assembly all of a week earlier, which is when Swampy began to realize he'd been institutionally blackballed from the only company he'd ever worked for. So when capitalists say, if you just work hard, you'll make your money, all you got to do is go work, this is what the fuck we're talking about, okay? Capitalists are crooks. Specifically, these corporate capitalists, okay? Corporations are way worse than your mom and pops, all right? Even though some mom and pops, total dog shit. And you've worked for dog shit mom and pops or someone similar, like a franchisee or something. Total dog shit business owners. Temporarily embarrassed millionaires, all of them. So dog shit. There is no security in capitalism, and that is the fucking insidious problem. A man that has spent 30 years becoming an expert on airplane safety should be the guy doing your airplane safety, unless he starts doing a bad job. But he's not. He's doing a good job. They're telling him to stop doing well. He got 2 more internal job offers rescinded after that, including one from a group that was literally desperate for someone with Barnett's breadth of experience. They didn't care how bad I wanted him, the senior manager told one of Swampy's friends. They said John Barnett is not going anywhere. Wow. Finally, in early 2017, Swampy happened upon a printout of lists of 49 quality managers to fire. The name John Barnett was number 1. Swampy decided to go on a medical leave of absence. Wow. Did you keep this? Which turned out into early retirement on March 1st. He called a labor lawyer he knew from a colleague's case, and together they began the seemingly unending process of filing an aviation whistleblower complaint detailing his 7 years at the Charleston plant. It made him sick to think that the value of his Boeing shares had tripled over the same period during which he'd watched the company get so comprehensively dismantled. But it was downright surreal to watch the stock price nearly triple once more during the 2 years after he left the company. 9 days after the stock reached its high of 440, a brand new 737 MAX dove into the ground near Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, at nearly 800 miles per hour, killing 157 people on board, thanks to a shockingly dumb software program that had programmed the jet to nosedive in response to the input from a single angle of attack sensor. No redundancy. One sensor that was faulty and literally sent people into nosedives. Insane.
Fuck bicycles.
Can you imagine if this didn't happen in Ethiopia and this was an American problem? Like, if this happened on American soil, the fuck up that this would happen. But, of course, we don't humanize people in other places, especially not Ethiopia. So, we had to hear about this from John Oliver in this article and others. Imagine if one of these guys tried to make a time machine. Oops, there goes the fabric of space-time. Oh, yeah, it's over. I mean, there's no way to help them. The software had already killed 189 people on a separate 737 MAX in Indonesia, but Boeing had largely deflected blame for that crash by exploiting the island nation's reputation for aviation laxity. Now it was clear Boeing was responsible for all the deaths. Swampy had no first-hand experience with the 737 MAX, but it was obvious that the ethos that drove the 787 plant had poisoned that program as well. He began sharing his story in media interviews and soon the Department of Justice, which had opened a criminal investigation into the MCAS flight control system crashes that quickly widened to encompass the Dreamliner program, came calling as well. While the criminal probe ultimately shriveled into one of the most pathetic plea bargains in the history of American justice, something shifted within the FAA. This is so gross. Boeing had quietly assumed many of the roles traditionally played by its primary regulator, an arrangement that was ethically absurd, though in practice it probably worked better than being regulated by an agency full of underpaid bureaucrats desperate to ingratiate themselves to Boeing. Swampy's best friend and later wife, Diane Johnson, worked at Boeing as an FAA liaison. Jeez. Most of the Boeing employees who worked in quasi-regulatory roles were like Swampy, terrified if anything going wrong on a plane they had inspected and deeply skeptical of their bosses who seemed unconcerned with the consequences because they were going to push it off onto dudes like Swampy. Fuck Boeing, dude. Fuck these corporations in general. That's 400 lives. 350. 340. Human lives, man. There's fucking kids on this plane. And this one. Amid the MAX grounding, the FAA began to take a closer look at the 787 program that was the subject of so many complaints from workers and airlines. The company had campaigned the FAA heavily to approve a random sampling method of inspecting the precision of the shims it cut to connect various pieces of the plane together. A closer look revealed the shims were not as precisely sized as the company had boasted. 8 planes were immediately grounded, and the agency forced Boeing to halt deliveries pending further investigation. Weeks stretched into years as nonconformances and noncompliances piled up. Boeing looked for flaws in its Dreamliner and couldn't stop finding them, one headline summarized. Wow. They literally couldn't stop it. What a glowing review. In December 2022, Aviation Week produced a helpful diagram mapping what section of the plane had caused auditors to be the biggest headaches. Let's see it. Where's it at? The main areas of Boeing 787 quality issues. Wait, that doesn't have the... Okay, that's weird. I thought that was an image, but apparently it was data on top of an image. Gap, shimming, and excessive clamp-up forces used during assembly. Flight deck windows. Geez, look at this. Shimming defects and gaps. Surface quality defects, gaps and incorrect processes for adhesive applications on the fucking wings, leading edge panel ply issues. I saw some of these where they literally use plywood to make this shit work. Make these fuckers fly in the death traps they're responsible for? Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Every single section from the tip of the nose to the horizontal stabilizers was marked up with red arrows. In 2023, deliveries were halted in January, February, and again in August over problems with the shimming, the horizontal stabilizer, and God knows what else. Swampy and hundreds of others who had blown the whistle on Boeing's managerial nihilism had been thoroughly vindicated, but it was too late. There were no more cleanup crews left at Boeing. Too much of the knowledge had been drained from the company. For every new plane you put up in the sky, there are about 20,000 problems you need to solve. And for a long time, we used to say Boeing's core competency was piling people and money on top of a problem until they crushed it, says Stan Storscher, a longtime Boeing physicist and former officer of the Society of Professional Engineering Employees in Aerospace. Wow, we have a lot of acronyms. The labor union representing Boeing engineers, but those people are gone. Storscher has warned Boeing management for decades now of the catastrophic effects of the brain drain inflicted by its war on brilliance. He says it's not a war on brilliance, it's a war on paying for brilliance. They're cheap. They want their raises. This is why they should... I know you're in a union, but you should just have a co-op. The people who literally build the planes and are the engineers should make all the profit. You feel me? Or not all of it. I mean, there's other stuff that goes into that. But, like, a lot of it. They should share in the profit directly, not just stock options, dude. He says, like literally a portion of every plane. He says McDonnell Douglas managers published a statistical analysis in 97 gauging productivity against the average seniority of managers across various programs that found the greener workforces were substantially less productive, which he found to be a mirror image of a kind of rule of thumb within Boeing that held that every Boeing employee takes 4 years to become fully productive. But the average employee assigned to the 737 program has been at Boeing just 5 years. According to a longtime Boeing executive, that's the average, who is involved in various efforts to save the company. For comparison's sake, he says the average employee assigned to the 777 program had been between 15 and 20 years under their belt. The typical engineer or machinist assigned to the task of fixing Boeing's 20,000 problems has never known a Boeing that wasn't a 5-alarm dumpster fire. This is a great article. There's a terrifying visual representation of this. The satellite view of the Moses Lake Municipal Airport in an arid stretch of Washington east of Seattle, or the Southern California Logistics Airport in Victorville, California, where hundreds of Boeing 737 MAXs sit in abandoned parking lots waiting for someone to fix them so they can finally be delivered. Wow. Just tons of them, dude. Meanwhile, pieces are flying off of the Boeing planes, actually in use at the alarming rates. Look at this. Missing panel, grounds 25-year-old Boeing jet at Medford Airport, no injuries. Criminal investigations are underway, and another in a long line of stock-conscious CEOs is stepping down. Boeing's largest union, the machinists, is trying to snag a board seat because, in the words of its local president, we have to save this company from itself. This is nice. The unions are going to try to take over the company, and maybe they will. That could be great. SPIA has demanded, understandably, that the board choose an aerospace engineer as its next CEO. Holy shit. But there are few signs that will happen. Wait, how do they demand it and it doesn't happen? Just what? None of the names floated thus far for the spot have been aerospace engineers, and the shoo-in for the position, GE's Larry Culp, is not an engineer at all. By now you know, well, never mind. By now you know what became of Swampy. He was found dead a few weeks ago with a gunshot wound to his right temple, apparently self-inflicted, on what was meant to be the third day of a 3-day deposition in his whistleblower case against his former employer. His amended complaint, which his lawyer released last week, is the basis for much of this story. Strange death of a Boeing whistleblower. It is worth noting here that Swampy's former co-workers universally refuse to believe that their old colleague killed himself. They universally do. All of them? One former co-worker who was terrified of speaking publicly went out of their way to tell me that they weren't suicidal. If I show up dead anytime soon, even if it's a car accident or something, I'm a safe driver. Please be on the lookout for foul play. Swampy's wife, Diane, who worked at Boeing for 28 years, died of brain cancer at age 60 in late 2022. Discussing Swampy's death and the whistleblower lawsuit he left behind, the brain cancer. This was a carcinogen-based brain cancer. Discussing Swampy's death and the whistleblower lawsuit he left behind, the longtime former Boeing executive told me, I don't think one can be cynical enough when it comes to these guys. Did that mean he thought Boeing assassinated Swampy? Quotes, it's a top-secret military contractor, remember? There are spies everywhere. He replied. More importantly, he added, there is a principle in American law that there is no such thing as an accidental death during the commission of a felony. Let's say you rob a bank and while traveling at high speed in the getaway, you run down a pedestrian and kill them. That's second-degree murder at the very least. Now, I don't work for Boeing, but they could still kill me. So I don't think that I'll be flying on any Boeing planes if I can help it. Certainly not a 787. 737, nope. Like the 737s, the average employee assigned to the 737, which is very popular, and I have flown them before, has been at Boeing just 5 years. The average employee assigned to the 777, 15 and 20. 787s are very similar as well. So 737s and 787s. 737 MAX was the really bad one. R.I.P. Swampy. Just try and do his fucking job. Never going to be able to see any justice. His wife is dead. He's dead. Corporations don't give a fuck. Isn't that great? How corporations just will fucking kill people. And I was on multiple 737s in December. Had to tell myself constantly that I was safe and everything would be fine. This is not reassuring. Well, the one reassuring thing for an American is that they're shipping the defectives to other countries, at least. I guess we'll see, huh? Yeah, I'm not a big fan of flying either. It's stressful to me. But I'll do it. Now go read the Twitter threads on this. It's all Biden and leftist fault. Oh, yeah. It's all DEI. DEI. Uh-huh. Sure, dude. Very DEI'd.